The language of business is math, and the budget makes or breaks a business. So if we know that business is math, and the math turns into a budget, and the budget makes or breaks the business, why do we get so emotionally involved in this? It makes me think back of this story long ago. I remember there was a big, huge uproar. I was probably in high school or something, maybe college, and McDonald's started not giving away napkins in the drive-thru. Or if they did, they gave one. But they made a big thing about you have to ask for napkins. And people went crazy, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with this? Are they anti-napkin?" And people thought, how much does a napkin cost anyway? I want you to think about that. How much does a napkin cost? Do you know? Okay, let's say that even with a company like McDonald's, they're just a fraction of a penny. Well, if somebody's handing out stacks of them, 30 of them at a time, and that comes up, maybe that's 1 penny. But what if that's happening in thousands of stores? And what if that's happening with every single person, every single time they go through the drive-thru, all across the world? Well, then all of a sudden the cost of that napkin is actually really expensive. So how do you get your employees to that point where they're like, I don't need to give 30 napkins away at the drive-thru? You need to get them to be on board with what it means to follow the path and follow the budget. So I have top 3 tips for this. And these are really about things that, as I say them, you'll go, well, that makes sense. And the reality of implementing them is not always as easy. But number 1 is explain it to them. Absolutely. Not everybody needs to know every part of the entire company budget, but they really need to know and understand the role they play in their part of it. And until you explain it to them and you have really good, honest dialogues, then they're never going to fully know, and there's the gap there. There's the reason why we don't understand the cost of a napkin versus the cost of a stack of napkins that we don't even know the numbers on. So when we explain this, you also as a leader have to be prepared to have people push back. Well, I don't like that number, and I don't know why we have to do that, and why does the company need to make that much money? In which case, those are other dialogues, and there's a whole other level of professionalism with them. But it really is about making sure people first understand that they do play a role, and what they do or don't do impacts the entire company. Number 2, begin each fiscal year with clear expectations on income and expenses for every person, and break it down as it makes sense, because salespeople should be looking at daily sales, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually. Well, you may not be in that kind of situation, so at least monthly, we need to know what the expectations are for income and expenses, so people know when they are off or when they're on. And number 3, have frequent communications with your team. Now, this is not just for when, my story about the down report. This is not just when people are off, but when they're on track. It's important that leaders recognize and really validate those people who are working hard to stay on track, as well as help the people that are off track. It shouldn't be a punishment. It should be a teaching opportunity. So every time there's somebody who's off, then that's the greatest opportunity for you as a leader to help them. A lot of times when I look back on that down report, I see that the people that were off that continued to have excuses, I needed to help them more. And some I did and some I didn't. And I regret the ones that I didn't, because sometimes I got frustrated with the fact that they couldn't comply or wouldn't comply. Actually, I would think that they wouldn't comply. And as I have more space from that, I realize perhaps there's times they couldn't have complied. And that really falls to me to be able to teach them. So long ago, it seems like all my stories start with long ago, but when I took my biggest first sales leadership position, it was with a company that had been in existence for almost 15 years. lots and lots of locations, lots of people, and done well. And I use the quotation marks as done well, meaning, they had nice revenue, and, they were making profit, and that was fantastic. But they had always had a budget, but they'd never achieved it. Now, so it's interesting when you have something like this, because if you've never achieved budget, but you're always still making money, there's not the same drive to feel the importance to budget. So when I first started meeting with these people who are now leaders reporting to me and explaining that we are going to hit budget and we may even exceed it from the sales revenue standpoint, and I really wanted us to have that mindset, that there were a lot of blank faces that looked back at me a lot. And it was interesting to be able to have those first dialogues and ask people things like, well, does it bother you that you've never achieved budget? And every single answer was no. I mean, that would be a nice thing, but who cares? And that was what told me right away that the dialogues that we had to have were going to have to be frequent. They were going to have to be detailed, and I was going to have to get these people motivated. And the real joy of that organization was that I started mid-year with them, so we did not achieve budget that year, but we were close. And the second year we did. And I did a little dance. It was really fun. I remember when my partner in crime in the finance department, who helped me with everything financial, came to me and said, do you realize that in the first time in the nearly 15-year history, we have hit budget? And it was a few days before the end of the fiscal year. And I just was elated. I had to really make sure that I celebrated that with each of those leaders and get them to understand how very important that was. And from that point on, you could see the fire in them. They wanted it again. And they knew what it was going to take. So your assignment now is, if you are a leader right now, I want you to stop and take some time to journal about where you are in your fiscal year. Are you on track? Are you off track? Above budget? Below budget? And look both in terms of income and expenses. And if any of the ways you are off track, I want you to spend some detailed time coming up with what your strategy is to try and bridge that gap. If you're above budget and you are knocking it out of the park, then really take some time to think about what are the factors that are leading to that, and how can you replicate them? How can you keep them going? And the final component is how are you going to continue to work with your team to get them to embrace the budget? Now, if you're not yet a leader and you want to be, think about the budget that you have. And if you don't know exactly what it is, go to your leader and talk to them about it and tell them you're interested in it. I'll tell you what, if I had one of my direct salespeople come to ask me more about what the company as a whole had expectation-wise, I would have been completely impressed. Oh wait, I did have one. He was one of the best gems, one of the greatest salespeople I've ever encountered. And I'll tell you what, he wanted to know how we were doing as a company. And when we hit that first win, he celebrated just as much as I did.